Before the roar of armies and the rise of marble palaces, there was only the river. The Ganges flowed through a quiet world, mist curling over the water, fishermen casting nets in silence, and temple bells echoing from unseen villages. At dawn, the land of India was a tapestry of kingdoms, each small and proud, each guarded by its own gods. From the Himalayas to the southern plains, princes ruled behind high walls, and merchants carried silks and spices through dusty roads. But beyond the chants of Brahmin priests and the hum of village life, a quiet restlessness stirred. The people had grown weary of endless wars between neighbors, Magadha against Kosala, Avanti against Kalinga. And then came the storm from the west. Alexander of Macedon crossed the mountains and reached the edges of India, his bronze armor gleaming beneath the sun. He left as swiftly as he came, but his shadow remained. In his wake came Greek generals, soldiers, and ideas. The thought that a single man could command the world. In a humble village near Pataliputra, a young boy watched all of this with silent eyes. He was not born a prince. He had no kingdom, no wealth, no army. But he carried something greater, the fierce dream of unity. His name was Chandragupta. Beside him walked a teacher, sharp-eyed, ascetic, wrapped in a torn robe. His name would echo through centuries as Chanakya or Kautilya, the mind that shaped empires. Together, they would write a new chapter for India, not in poetry or myth, but in power and law. Soon, the river that once carried fishermen and monks would carry elephants, soldiers, and banners of war. Villages would rise into cities. Kingdoms would bow before one throne. The Maurya Empire was coming, an empire of iron, elephants, and intellect, destined to bind a continent. But for now, the river still whispers in the mist. It carries the scent of incense, the murmur of prayers, and the first heartbeat of a dream. The dream of one India, united under the will of a single man. Before the Mauryas, India was not a single nation, but a mosaic of realms, each glittering like a fragment of broken glass beneath the sun. From the fertile plains of Magadha to the forests of Kalinga, from the deserts of the west to the snows of the Himalayas. Kings ruled with pride, poets sang of their power, and yet none could claim the land entire. Magadha was strong. Its capital, Pataliputra, sat like a jewel at the meeting of the Ganges and Sun rivers, protected by wooden walls and watchtowers. To the north, the kingdoms of Kosala and Videha traded in horses and gold. Farther west, beyond the Indus, the remnants of Alexander's campaign, the satrapies of the Greeks, lingered, half foreign, half Indian, ruled by men who wore laurel crowns but prayed to strange gods. Between these powers flowed life, caravans of spices, pearls, and ivory. Monks walking barefoot between cities to preach their truths, and farmers who bowed not to kings, but to the rhythm of the monsoon. The air carried many tongues: Sanskrit, Prakrit, Greek, Persian. It was a land rich beyond measure, but without unity, like a vast orchestra without a conductor. And in the court of the Nandas, the last dynasty before the Mauryas, that imbalance reached its height. The Nandas ruled Magadha with cruelty and suspicion. Their treasury overflowed, but their people lived in fear. Spies moved through every market. Tax collectors roamed every road. The poor whispered curses under their breath while gold piled up behind palace doors. In this world of corruption and division, hope seemed as faint as the light of dawn through smoke. Yet history is fond of irony, for it was from the lowest of places that destiny began to turn. In a dusty village far from the court, a child was born of ordinary blood. His hands were small, but his eyes burned with the quiet fire of purpose. He watched soldiers pass, heard stories of faraway kings, and wondered why India, vast, brilliant India, should always kneel before the few. That child was Chandragupta, and not far away, another figure was preparing for his arrival. Chanakya, a Brahmin scholar wronged and humiliated by the Nanda king. Legend says his hair was matted with dust, his anger cold as iron. He swore before the gods that he would destroy the dynasty that had mocked him. One night, under a flickering oil lamp, Chanakya opened a scroll. On it, he began to write a treatise, not of poetry, but of power. It would become known as the Arthashastra, a manual for kings, spies, and rulers. In its pages lay the art of diplomacy, deception, and war. And when he met the boy who would be king, destiny recognized itself. Chanakya saw in Chandragupta not a mere youth, but a weapon forged by circumstance, sharp, disciplined, and waiting to be tempered by wisdom. Together they would rise, a teacher and a student, a mind and a sword. And in the corridors of Magadha's palace, where fear once ruled, whispers began to shift. The people spoke of rebellion, of a new leader, of a force that could drive out both tyranny and foreign rule. India was ready. The rivers, the forests, and the mountains seemed to listen. The Ganges, flowing endlessly eastward, reflected the moonlight like a path of silver, leading toward a future unseen. The age of small kings was fading. An empire was coming, one born not from luxury, but from discipline, cunning, and a vision grand enough to unite the heart of a continent. The Maurya dream had begun to breathe. Night had fallen over the plains of Magadha. In the faint glow of torches, a young man practiced sword forms beneath a banyan tree. His movements were silent, his breath measured. The stars above watched as though recording the birth of destiny. His name, Chandragupta Maurya, would soon echo across 1,000 valleys. He was not born into power. Some said he came from humble farming stock. Others whispered that royal Iso. Blood ran in his veins. Whatever the truth, he grew in hardship. He watched soldiers of the Nanda king ride past villages with arrogance. He saw peasants bow, taxes rise, and justice sold to the highest bidder. In his heart, rebellion took root, not of chaos, but of balance. Then came Chanakya, a scholar, a strategist, a man whose mind cut through lies as easily as steel cuts silk. He had been humiliated in the Nanda court, thrown out by the arrogant king Nanda. His revenge was not rage, it was patience. He saw in Chandragupta a vessel for that vengeance, a soul brave enough to shoulder the weight of empire. Under the dim light of oil lamps, Chanakya taught him more than the art of war. He taught him how men think, how greed blinds, how fear binds, how loyalty can be bought, and how power must be earned. He trained Chandragupta to listen, not only to generals, but to whispers in the market, to the fears of farmers, to the silence between words. In the monastery's stone halls, the lessons of the Arthashastra became flesh. Rule, Chanakya said, is not won by the sword alone. The mind must strike first. So they moved like shadows through northern India, gathering allies, stirring the poor and the brave. One by one, the oppressed came to them. Farmers, soldiers, outcasts, dreamers. From their number, an army was born, not of noble blood, but of common will. When the time came, they struck the Nandas where they were weakest, their pride. Chandragupta's forces appeared like mist at dawn, swift and silent. Forts fell not through brute strength, but through deception. Gates opened by coin or cunning rather than steel. At last, the Nanda capital, Pataliputra, trembled. the mighty Dhanananda fled, leaving his treasury and throne behind. The empire that had once crushed its people was broken by one of their own. And in that moment, standing before the city of his birth, Chandragupta felt the air change. The cries of victory echoed across the river, mixing with the songs of monks in distant temples. He bowed, not to the gods above, but to the people below. A new order was born. The Maurya Empire had taken its first breath. But power, once seized, demands more than courage to keep. As the fires of conquest dimmed, Chanakya's mind turned to something greater, the art of governing a realm vast enough to rival the heavens themselves. Together, they built anew. Roads stretched like veins through the empire. Couriers and spies carried news faster than storms. From the Himalayas to the southern seas, laws were written, markets opened, peace enforced. And yet, in every victory, there was silence in Chandragupta's eyes. He had risen from dust to glory, but he knew how fragile glory could be. The winds of ambition never rest. Across the western border, the Greeks stirred again, led by Seleucus Nicator, heir to Alexander's dream. Soon, the Maurya king would face his first test, not against India's own princes, but against the legacy of the greatest conqueror the world had ever known. The river flowed eastward once more. The drums of war began to sound again, this time for the fate of an empire. Morning broke over the Ganges, and the mist parted to reveal a new city, alive, ordered, immense. Wooden walls glistened with dew. Elephants rumbled through wide streets lined with merchants and guards. The scent of wet clay and incense hung in the air. From this heart of the plains, the Mauryan dream began to take form. The city was called Pataliputra, the jewel of the East, the seat of Chandragupta's power. It was more than a capital. It was a symbol. Built at the meeting of rivers, it was a fortress of trade and spirit, where kings could rule and scholars could write. Chanakya had chosen the site with precision. The rivers would guard it like living walls. Its ports would welcome caravans from all directions. Within its palisades lay an empire in miniature. Palaces of polished wood, halls for ministers, quarters for merchants, and hidden chambers for spies. For Chanakya knew that an empire must not only conquer land, but understand the shadows that move within it. In those first years, Pataliputra hummed with ambition. Blacksmiths forged blades and plows in the same furnaces. Farmers brought grain from distant provinces. Traders offered silk from Bactria, pearls from the south, horses from Persia. The clang of the marketplace rose with the chanting of monks, and both spoke of the same thing: order after chaos. At dawn, the king would walk the palace gardens with Chanakya, his feet brushing the dew, his mind heavy with questions. "How does one keep such vastness united?" he asked one morning. "Through sight," the old teacher replied. "Eyes must be everywhere, in temples, in taverns, in the whispers of the road. A ruler who does not see all is already blind." And so the Mauryan administration was born, a web of ministers and informants, judges and collectors, all bound by discipline. Taxes were fair yet firm. Granaries were stocked. Irrigation canals stretched through the plains. The roads, wide, marked by milestones, connected the farthest provinces, like arteries carrying the lifeblood of empire. Even the army was an organism unto itself. Elephants armored in bronze, archers drilled in silence, cavalry swift as wind. Some said 500,000 men stood ready under the Mauryan banners, the greatest force India had ever seen. Yet the king's true strength was not the sword, but the law. Chanakya's Arthashastra became the invisible crown of the empire. It taught that mercy must serve justice, and justice must serve stability. "The state," he wrote, "is the greatest good of all." Foreign envoys began to arrive. Persians, Greeks, and envoys from lands the Indians had only heard of in legend. Among them came Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador from Seleucus's court, wide-eyed at the splendor of the Mauryan realm. He would later write of Pataliputra's wooden walls, its markets of gold, its disciplined guards, and its people. Proud, industrious, content. By the time his ink dried, the Mauryas had done what few thought possible, turned a fractured land into a machine of order and vision. Yet beneath the calm surface of rivers and roads, the winds of history were shifting again. To the northwest, Seleucus Nicator, Alexander's general turned king, watched from beyond the Hindu Kush. The Greeks still dreamed of empire, of reclaiming the lands their master had touched. And in the marble halls of Pataliputra, messengers whispered of foreign armies gathering in Bactria. The Mauryan banners would soon meet the standards of the West. But tonight, as lamps flickered in the palace corridors and the river shimmered beneath the moon, the empire slept in peace. Pataliputra stood silent, vast, orderly, breathing like a living being. The age of isolation was gone. The age of contact and confrontation had begun. The wind that crossed the Hindu Kush carried the scent of two worlds, olive and sandalwood, bronze and silk. To the west lay the remnants of Alexander's dream, the Greek satrapies of Bactria, where marble columns rose beside Buddhist shrines. To the east, the new Mauryan power, restless and immense, watched with growing confidence. Between them stretched a land of mountains, trade, and memory, the bridge between Europe and India. It was inevitable that their banners would meet. From his stronghold in Babylon, Seleucus Thersicator, once a general of Alexander, set his eyes eastward. He had rebuilt much of the old Macedonian realm and dreamed of reclaiming the Indian provinces that had slipped from his grasp after Alexander's death. To restore that legacy, he marched toward the Indus with an army hardened by Persian deserts and Greek discipline. But the world had changed. Waiting for him beyond the river was no scattered coalition of Indian princes. It was a single empire under one will. Chandragupta Maurya, now emperor, met Seleucus's challenge not with arrogance, but with strategy. The Mauryan forces, vast, organized, and tireless, moved through the plains like a living tide. Elephants in iron armor led the vanguard, their tusks sheathed in silver. Behind them came archers, cavalry, and infantry trained in formations that seemed to breathe as one. The clash between Greece and India was not recorded in full. The dust of time has softened its edges. Yet the outcome is clear. Seleucus, though valiant, found himself facing not a mere king, but a system, a state forged by intellect and law. He withdrew, realizing that to fight the Mauryas was to fight the land itself. So he chose diplomacy over ruin. And in that decision, two civilizations met not in destruction, but in exchange. Seleucus and Chandragupta agreed upon a peace that astonished the world. The Greeks ceded their eastern territories from the Indus to Arachosia in return for 500 war elephants, those living fortresses that would later decide battles in the west. But more remarkable than the treaty was what followed. A Greek envoy, Megasthenes, was sent to the Mauryan court. In Pataliputra, beneath banners embroidered with gold and peacock feathers, he witnessed an empire unlike any other, disciplined, spiritual, and vast. He wrote of wide avenues where merchants and monks mingled, of judges who held court in open squares, of elephants trained like soldiers, of women who owned property, of spies who walked among the crowd unseen. To the Greeks, India had always been a land of myth, where philosophers lived in caves and rivers glowed with moonlight. But Megasthenes saw reality, a civilization of order and moral ambition, ruled not by whim but by principle. Through his writings, the Indika, the West learned of the East, of the Ganges, of the vastness of Pataliputra, of the calm eyes of the Mauryan Emperor. For the first time, the two great ends of the known world looked upon each other with curiosity rather than conquest. And yet, peace never rests forever. As Seleucus returned west, his elephants would shape future wars. As Chandragupta ruled in the east, his gaze turned inward, toward the burden of ruling so vast a realm. The Maurya Empire had secured its borders, its wealth, its name. But power carries its own fatigue. In the quiet years that followed, a son would take the throne. One less known, yet vital to the bridge between two ages. His name was Bindusara, the slayer of enemies. History would remember him as the man who held together what his father built, and as the father of another, who would one day be called Ashoka the Great. From the Himalayan foothills to the blue waters of the southern seas, the Mauryan banners now fluttered in the wind. Peacocks embroidered in gold, elephants carved on seals, the symbol of an empire that had mastered both the sword and the law. Under Chandragupta Maurya, and later his son Bindusara, India was no longer a cluster of rival kingdoms. It had become a single breathing organism, disciplined, efficient, and astonishingly modern for its time. Caravans rolled along royal highways that stretched farther than the eye could follow. Some roads ran through forests where lions prowled, others crossed deserts shimmering with heat. At intervals stood rest houses, wells, and patrol towers. Travelers could move from the Indus to Bengal, from the Deccan to the Himalayas, under the same protection, the Dharma of the king. In the marketplaces of Pataliputra, voices mingled in a dozen tongues: Greek, Aramaic, Tamil, Prakrit, Persian. Traders came from distant Alexandria, bringing coral, glass, and wine. In return, they carried home ivory, sandalwood, pepper, and gems that glittered like captured starlight. The empire's wealth flowed through its arteries. Taxes gathered from fertile lands, tributes from frontier provinces, revenues from mines and forests. But these riches were not left to stagnate in palaces. Under the guidance of Chanakya's enduring system, they were used to build roads, irrigation tanks, canals, and workshops. Every province had its governor, every town its magistrate, every village its headman. Reports were sent to the capital by couriers who galloped through the night. Even spies were registered, paid, and rotated to prevent corruption. It was a machine of precision, human, yet almost mechanical in its efficiency. At the center of it all stood the emperor, calm, watchful, and burdened with the knowledge that peace must be maintained as fiercely as war. Bindusara, Chandragupta's son, ruled after his father retired. Legend says Chandragupta renounced his throne and became a Jain ascetic, fasting to death in a distant cave. The son inherited not only a vast realm, but also the delicate art of holding it together. He ruled for decades, neither a conqueror nor a dreamer, but a keeper of balance. His armies kept the borders secure, his administrators ensured prosperity, and his navy guarded the coasts. Envoys from Greece and Egypt continued to visit, astonished that such a vast land could remain stable under a single hand. The Mauryan Empire during Bindusara's reign was a living map of order. In its cities, scholars studied astronomy and medicine. In its temples, monks debated the nature of the soul. Farmers tilled their land with oxen as old as the Rig Veda. The empire did not merely rule, it nourished. And yet, even as prosperity blossomed, the seeds of change were quietly sown. For power, like the monsoon, comes and goes in cycles. Among Bindusara's many sons, there was one whose gaze was deeper than the rest, a prince named Ashoka. He was fierce, impatient, and brilliant, trained in both war and philosophy. His tutors whispered that he possessed the iron of Chandragupta and the intellect of Chanakya, but also a dangerous fire in his heart. As Bindusara grew old, the empire trembled again, not from invasion, but from ambition. Brothers turned to rivals, ministers took sides, armies marched not across borders, but across bloodlines. And when the storm finally broke, the land that had known peace for a generation would see fire again. Not from enemies beyond, but from those within. The great Mauryan machine, once serene and orderly, would soon rumble under the weight of destiny. For history was preparing its next chapter, one that would lift the empire to its greatest moral height, and then begin its long descent into silence. His name was Ashoka, and his shadow would stretch across centuries. Between the lightning of Chandragupta's rise and the thunder of Ashoka's rule, there was a long and steady reign, the reign of Bindusara. He is the quiet figure between two giants, often forgotten by time, yet without him, the Mauryan flame might have flickered out before it could burn across the world. When Chandragupta renounced the world and journeyed south to live as a Jain ascetic, the court fell silent. The founder of empire had chosen renunciation over rule. The burden of unity now rested on his son's shoulders. Bindusara was not a conqueror like his father, nor a philosopher king like his son. He was something rarer, a stabilizer, a keeper of equilibrium. He inherited an empire that stretched from the Afghan mountains to the Bay of Bengal, from the Himalayas to the edge of the Tamil lands. To govern such immensity required not glory, but restraint. And restraint was Bindusara's art. He kept the machinery that Chanakya had built, the ministers, the networks, the roads, but tempered it with patience. His court became a place of quiet pragmatism, where decisions were weighed like gold on a scale. Reports arrived from every province, harvests, births, disputes, floods. Nothing escaped his notice, yet he ruled without spectacle. Foreigners came still, Greek envoys from Seleucid Syria, Egyptian merchants with scrolls and spices, Persian scholars bearing tales of distant Babylon. One Greek, Deimachus, recorded that Bindusara was fond of philosophy and of fine horses. Another story claims he once asked the Greek king Antiochus to send him sweet wine, dried figs, and a philosopher to teach him more of the world. Such stories, half myth, half truth, reveal a king whose curiosity bridged cultures, one who understood that wisdom, like trade, should flow freely between peoples. Yet not all was harmony. Within the palace, ambition stirred among his sons, princes raised in luxury but forged in rivalry. Bindusara had many children, but two names rose above the rest: Susima, the proud and favored heir, and Ashoka, the restless and brilliant one. Ashoka was sent to govern distant provinces, far from the court's intrigues. In the city of Ujjain, he learned the rhythm of governance, how to read the people, balance justice with mercy, and rule with steel hidden beneath silk. His eyes grew sharp, his heart harder. In him, the empire saw both promise and danger. Meanwhile, Bindusara's reign aged like bronze, not dazzling, but enduring. He oversaw decades of peace, where trade routes flourished, fields yielded plenty, and temples rose in every corner. Farmers sowed in confidence, merchants traveled without fear. The Mauryan system, so carefully engineered, ran smoothly. Proof that good governance could be its own kind of glory. But even stability must bend to time. As Bindusara grew frail, the question of succession turned from whisper to storm. Courtiers aligned with princes, soldiers pledged secret oaths, and the air of Pataliputra thickened with intrigue. In his final years, the old king watched the unity he had preserved begin to crack. Perhaps he knew that his sons would not share the peace he had kept. Perhaps he understood that the wheel of empire turns not by will alone, but by destiny's demand for renewal, often through fire. When Bindusara finally passed, the empire held its breath. The great machine of the Mauryas did not stop, but its gears began to grind against one another. The coronation that followed was not one of celebration, but of blood. Ashoka, the once exiled prince, returned to claim what he believed was his by right. His path to the throne would be carved in silence, shadow, and sorrow. Soon, the land that had known calm under Bindusara would echo once again with the march of armies, not against foreign lands, but against brothers of the same blood. The peaceful era was ending. The age of Ashoka, ruthless, radiant, and transformative, was dawning. In the palace of Pataliputra, silence had turned to whispers, and whispers to fear. The old emperor Bindusara was gone, and with him, the delicate balance that had kept a continent at peace. In the shadows of marble halls and torchlit corridors, the sons of the Mauryan dynasty began to move against one another. Each claiming destiny, each armed with ambition. Among them was Ashoka, once sent away to govern distant Ujjain. He was neither the eldest nor the most beloved. The courtiers spoke of his temper, of his fierce eyes, of the soldiers who followed him not out of love, but awe. Yet in those uncertain days, it was precisely that strength the empire demanded. When the storm broke, it was swift and merciless. Brother fought brother. The royal guards changed allegiance with each sunrise. History does not record every name that fell, only the silence that followed. When the dust cleared, Ashoka stood alone, the victor of a war that had no glory, only cost. The coronation that followed was not triumphant. The drums sounded low, the sky gray with monsoon clouds. The new emperor's face was unreadable as he placed the crown upon his head. He had gained the throne of the greatest empire in India, but at the price of his own blood. At first, his reign burned bright. He was determined to restore order, to prove that strength could bring peace. His armies moved like thunder across the plains, reclaiming borderlands and stamping out rebellion. Fortresses rose, provinces obeyed, and the name Ashoka spread with the wind. Yet, behind the efficiency lay a growing hardness. The scars of his youth had taught him that mercy was weakness, that rule meant control. He was called Chandragupta, Ashoka the Fierce. Even his own ministers spoke carefully in his presence. Then came Kalinga, a kingdom of freedom and pride resting on the eastern shore. Kalinga had never bowed to Magadha, never paid tribute, never knelt to empire. Its people were sailors, artisans, monks, lovers of independence. To Ashoka, they were a challenge that could not be ignored. The campaign began like all others. Elephants armored in bronze, drums echoing across rivers, banners fluttering beneath monsoon skies. But Kalinga was different. Its defenders fought not for gold or kings, but for home. Men and women alike stood on the walls. Farmers took up spears. Even monks blessed the resistance with prayers whispered into the wind. The war raged for months. Villages burned, rivers ran red, and when it ended, The victory was total, yet hollow. More than 100,000 lay dead, countless others taken captive. Smoke drifted across the land like mourning cloth. When Ashoka rode through the ruins, he saw no triumph, only ghosts. The cries of mothers, the silence of fields, the ashes of temples. All the power in the world could not silence the weight of what he had done. That night, he could not sleep. The drums of war still echoed in his mind, but softer now, like a heartbeat fading away. He walked alone through the desolate plain, where the moonlight glimmered on broken swords and forgotten helmets. And for the first time, the emperor wept. In that moment, the conqueror who had united India began to conquer himself. He turned not to soldiers, but to Dharma, the path of righteousness, the teaching of the Buddha. He would never again raise the sword for ambition. His empire would no longer grow by war, but by compassion. The man who had been called the Fierce would soon be known by another name, Ashoka the Great. The battlefield of Kalinga had been silent for months. The smoke had lifted, the bodies buried, the temples rebuilt. Yet one man carried that battlefield within him still, Emperor Ashoka. He had once ruled through fear. His word was law, his will unchallenged. But as he stood upon the ruins of Kalinga, watching the river carry away ashes like black petals, something inside him broke. Quietly, completely. The empire had been won, but his soul was lost. Not far from the palace, he began to visit monks, men who wore no crown, who spoke softly of suffering, impermanence, and the middle path. Among them were followers of the Buddha, who taught that peace begins not in kingdoms, but in the heart. Ashoka listened, at first out of curiosity, then out of need, and finally, out of faith. He began to walk barefoot in gardens where jasmine bloomed and peacocks called at dawn. He no longer asked how to conquer, but how to heal. The man who had once measured his worth in armies now measured it in compassion. The transformation was not sudden. Power rarely releases its grip easily. But one by one, Ashoka laid aside the weapons of kingship. He replaced conquest with Dharma, the moral law that bound all beings, human or otherwise. He ordered the creation of the Edicts of Ashoka, words carved into stone pillars and rocks across the land, from Afghanistan to southern India. They spoke not of victory, but of virtue, of truthfulness, of kindness to animals, of obedience to parents, of tolerance between faiths. Victory through Dharma, one inscription read, is the only true victory. These pillars, polished like mirrors, rose beside roads and rivers, each inscribed in multiple languages so all might understand. Travelers, farmers, monks, all who read them saw a ruler unlike any before him. Ashoka became the priest-king of peace, the emperor who ruled not only by law, but by conscience. He banned unnecessary slaughter of animals. He built hospitals for people and for beasts. He sent envoys, not with swords but with sermons, to Sri Lanka, to Egypt, to the Hellenistic kingdoms of the West. The court of Pataliputra changed too. Where once generals gathered to plan campaigns, now monks discussed philosophy. The sound of the conch shell, once the call to battle, became the call to prayer. And yet, this was not weakness. The empire, disciplined by law and enriched by trade, did not crumble under gentleness. It flourished, a civilization guided by ethics rather than fear. Roads remained safe, borders secure, cities prosperous. But there was a new rhythm beneath it all, a slower, kinder pulse. When Ashoka traveled through his lands, he no longer rode at the head of an army. He walked among the people, touching their hands, asking of their lives, leaving gifts for the poor. To those who still remembered the cruel emperor of old, it seemed a miracle. But in his private moments, Ashoka was still haunted. He would sit by the Ganges at dusk, listening to the river he had once filled with sorrow. The water now shimmered beneath the moonlight, endless and forgiving. And he would whisper prayers, not for glory, but for redemption. He knew that empires fade, but compassion endures. The stones of his palaces would crumble, but the words carved into his pillars might outlast time itself. And so he ruled, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian of peace. The king who once took 100,000 lives now vowed to save countless more through mercy. It was said that when Ashoka finally smiled again, it was not as a ruler who possessed the world, but as a man who had finally learned to let it go. The empire that once trembled under the sound of marching feet now echoed with the rustle of prayer flags. Under Ashoka, India entered an age unlike any before. An age not of conquest, but of conscience. From Pataliputra to the Himalayas, from the Sindh deserts to the island of Sri Lanka, the Mauryan realm pulsed with quiet purpose. Trade still flowed, armies still guarded the borders, and ministers still governed their provinces. But the spirit of the land had changed. It was as if the empire itself had taken a vow of compassion. Everywhere rose signs of this transformation. Along the great highways stood stone pillars carved with Ashoka's edicts, smooth, gleaming, inscribed in gentle words. Let no one exalt his own faith by degrading another. All men are my children. Wherever there are herbs or roots beneficial to man or beast, they shall be planted. These were not decrees of fear, but whispers of guidance, laws meant to heal rather than punish. Travelers read them by torchlight, monks recited them by memory. Children grew up hearing the emperor's teachings as part of the rhythm of life. Pataliputra, once the throne of conquest, became a capital of peace. Its wooden halls filled with scholars from every corner of the world, Brahmins, Jains, Ajivikas, and Buddhists debating the nature of truth. Messengers came from far kingdoms. From Sri Lanka, where Ashoka's own son, Mahinda, carried the Buddha's teachings. From Alexandria and Syria, where Greek kings corresponded with the Indian emperor who ruled by virtue, not violence. Even the smallest lives found protection. Ashoka's compassion extended to the forests and the rivers. New sanctuaries were declared where animals could roam unharmed. He ordered the digging of wells along roads, the planting of shade trees, the building of hospitals for people and for beasts. No traveler was to thirst, no creature to suffer needlessly. The empire's courtiers sometimes wondered if such gentleness could endure in a world built on ambition. But Ashoka's wisdom proved greater than sentiment. He understood that peace must have structure, that compassion must be administered with discipline. His bureaucracy remained precise, his army intact, his justice firm. Only its purpose had changed, not to subdue, but to protect. And so, the Mauryan world entered its golden rhythm. Monks walked freely through the empire, carrying scrolls and chants. Artisans carved stories of the Buddha into sandstone. Farmers prayed to harvest and to Dharma alike. The empire had become not merely a political realm, but a moral landscape. In the quiet of monasteries, bells chimed at dawn and dusk, marking time not by conquest, but by reflection. Pilgrims traveled along Ashoka's Dharma routes, stopping at stupas that dotted the plains, each one a symbol of enlightenment rising from the earth like a lotus from mud. Ashoka himself traveled often. He visited villages, shrines, and monasteries, not as a king above his people, but as a pilgrim among them. Wherever he went, he asked only one question: do the people live in peace? He aged softly, the fire in his eyes replaced by a serenity that even his ministers could not explain. To some, he seemed less a ruler than a sage wrapped in royal robes. To others, he was still a mystery, a man haunted by his past, yet redeemed by his mercy. In his final years, Ashoka commissioned great stone stupas, reliquaries to house the relics of the Buddha. They rose across the land like silent sentinels, marking the triumph of wisdom over war. When travelers looked upon them under the setting sun, they said the empire itself seemed to breathe. Calm, vast, eternal. And though Ashoka knew that no empire lasts forever, he also knew that peace could outlive walls, banners, and kings. For what he built was not merely an empire of land, but an empire of the mind, where the laws of compassion became the greatest strength of all. The bells that once rang through the empire grew fainter with time. Ashoka's reign, so luminous, so vast in compassion, slowly faded like the last light of a golden sunset. When the emperor passed away, the land mourned quietly. The rivers still flowed, the roads still stretched across the plains, the pillars still stood, gleaming beneath the sun. But something unseen began to loosen, the invisible thread that had held the empire together. The Mauryan machine, built on law and discipline, had always depended on the will of a single guiding mind. With Ashoka gone, that unity began to drift. His sons and grandsons inherited his throne, but not his vision. Some sought to rule as warriors, others as philosophers, but none carried the same fire that had bound millions beneath one rule. The court of Pataliputra changed. Where monks and scholars once debated Dharma, courtiers now argued over succession and silver. Provincial governors, once loyal, began to test the strength of their independence. In distant provinces, generals refused to send tribute. Armies that had once protected pilgrims now marched for new masters. The great highways still stretched across the land, but the watchtowers were empty. The tax caravans slowed. Traders began to fear the forests once again. Even the pillars of Ashoka, those silent witnesses to his moral vision, stood untouched, their inscriptions gathering dust and silence, waiting for voices that would never return. The world beyond India, too, had changed. To the northwest, the Greeks of Bactria had grown restless, carving small kingdoms from the remnants of empire. To the south, Tamil chieftains rose in the heat of ambition. To the west, the Seleucid world was fading, and new powers stirred beyond Persia. The Mauryan emperors after Ashoka tried to hold back the tide, but the tide had already turned. Without the binding force of one will, the empire fractured like clay in the sun. Each generation ruled over a smaller realm, until finally, the great city of Pataliputra itself was left vulnerable. It is said that the last Mauryan king, Brihadratha, was betrayed not by an enemy, but by his own general, Pushyamitra Sunga, during a military parade. The sword that ended his life also ended the Mauryan line. The banners of the peacock fell, and with them, 2 centuries of unity dissolved into legend. Yet the end was not violent in the way of other empires. No great sack, no burning cities, no rivers of blood. The Mauryan world did not collapse, it exhaled. Slowly, gently, the forests crept back over abandoned roads. The voices of birds replaced the clatter of caravans. The Ganges flowed on, patient as ever, carrying memories instead of soldiers. And among those memories was the dream of one India, born from Chandragupta's fire, refined by Chanakya's wisdom, and softened by Ashoka's compassion. The empire had fallen, but its spirit did not die. For the stones still whispered. Travelers centuries later would find Ashoka's pillars, standing tall in the wilderness, inscriptions still sharp, letters still clear. They would read of kindness, tolerance, and truth, and wonder what king had written such words. And so, though the Mauryan palaces returned to dust, the emperor's message outlived marble and throne alike. It became part of the soil, part of the rhythm of India itself. A quiet voice reminding the ages that greatness is not in conquest, but in conscience. When the moon rose above the silent ruins of Pataliputra, it shone upon what once had been the heart of the world. And the river, eternal witness, kept flowing east, whispering to the wind. Empires fade. Dharma endures. Night falls again upon the plains of Magadha. The river Ganges glimmers under the starlight, its surface rippling with the same patience it has held since the beginning. On its banks, where once rose the palaces of Pataliputra, now stand only fragments of stone, half buried in earth and grass. The empire that once ruled a continent has returned to the quiet from which it came. But the river remembers. It remembers the footsteps of Chandragupta, young and determined, walking beside his teacher Chanakya, two men dreaming of unity in a land of division. It remembers the thunder of elephants, the banners of conquest, the roar of victory when India first bowed to a single crown. It remembers the calm wisdom of Bindusara, who held that vastness together through patience and law. And it remembers Ashoka, who saw the world suffering and turned his sword into a prayer. Empires live and die, the river seems to say. But the current of ideas flows on. What the Mauryas built was not only of stone and steel, but of thought. The idea that strength without virtue is hollow, that rule without compassion is dust. Long after the banners fell, travelers still walked the ancient roads they had built. Monks carried Ashoka's teachings beyond mountains and seas, to Sri Lanka, to Burma, to the far lands of China. In every monastery bell that rings at dawn, in every act of kindness whispered across generations, a trace of that empire remains. The Ganges has watched countless dynasties rise and fade since then. Gupta, Mughal, British, each certain of its permanence, each learning, in time, that nothing built by man escapes the turning of the wheel. And yet, the Mauryas endure not in monuments, but in memory. In every call to peace, in every act of tolerance, in every quiet refusal of cruelty. There, their echo lives. The wind moves softly through the reeds now, carrying the scent of water and jasmine. Somewhere far away, a temple bell rings, and its sound drifts down the river like a voice from another age. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them. The monks chanting beneath starlit skies, the distant laughter of traders in the bazaar, the steady heartbeat of an empire that once dreamed of harmony between man and the world. The Maurya Empire is gone, but the river of time still flows, and in its song, the soul of India endures.